Today we're reading All's Well with Mango Pickles from Mango's Mischief and Tales of Friendship, Stories from India by Chitra Soundar, illustrated by Uma Krishnaswamy. All's Well with Mango Pickles. Long ago in a faraway land, King Bhima ruled a small kingdom surrounded by the magnificent hills of Himtuk. He was kind and a just ruler. He lived with his wife and his son, Prince Veera. Prince Veera studied many subjects, the arts, and mathematics, science, economics, and languages, including Persian, Mandarin, and Latin. Prince Veera's best friend Suku was not a royal. Suku had won the king's scholarship to study with the prince. He matched Veera's academic abilities and outdoor activities. Often the two boys competed in sports such as wrestling, archery, and horseback riding. When classes were over for the day, Prince Veera and Suku would wander through the markets and play in the mangroves. One day during the previous summer, King Bhima had been unwell. Prince Veera and Suku offered to help out with his duties, and the king had allowed them to set up a court in the palace courtyard. There the boys listened to people's problems and solved petty disagreements. Now the hot summer months were here once again. With no work to do on the farm and no classes, said Suku, I'm bored. Maybe we can ask Father to invite us to the dance performances in the palace, suggested Prince Veera. Please don't, said Suku. I can't sit in one place with a smile on my face for hours on end. That's my future you're describing, said Veera. What would you rather do instead? We could set up court, Suku replied. Prince Veera's eyes twinkled. What a good idea, he said with a big grin. Let's ask Father before he leaves for his hunting trip, he added, pulling Suku through the corridors. When they entered the royal chambers, they found the king's room in a flurry. Attendants were packing bags, clothes were strewn everywhere, and King Bhima was pacing the floor. Is something wrong? Asked Suku. Packing is always traumatic, explained Veera. I can't find my hunting knife, said King Bhima, exasperated. It should be where you left it, said the queen from behind a cupboard. She too was looking for something. That's not very helpful, said the king. Where did I leave it? Veera chuckled. His parents had this same conversation every time one of them left town. Did you want something? The king asked the boys. While you're away hunting, said Prince Veera, we wondered if we could run the court in the courtyard. This boy is after my throne, I tell you, said King Bhima, smiling. You may run the court as long as you don't bite off more than you can chew. We never do, said Prince Veera. Thank you, Father. I wish you good fortune on your hunt. May the Vandavata, the forest nymphs, help you along the way, said Suku. As they left, a loud whoop came from the room. The king must have found his hunting knife after all. The two boys rushed out to get ready for a court the following day. The next morning, a long line of people waited outside the palace to meet the king. When they found out he was away, many of them were very disappointed. Prince Veera is happy to listen to your problems, he announced the guard. Some people left, but many stayed to meet with the prince. They had heard wonderful things about his court. Prince Veera summoned the first case. Two neighbors, Gapu and Danu, had come with a unique problem. Gapu had an old well in his overgrown garden, which he never used. Danu wanted to buy the well. A price was agreed on, and a document was drawn up. I hereby sell just my well situated behind my house to Danu, my neighbor, for 10 silver coins. The two men signed the document, and Danu was happy to acquire the well in time for summer. So what's the problem? Asked Suku. You sold him the well, he bought the well, so all's well. Prince Veera smiled at Suku's bad joke. But he couldn't figure out the cause of their disagreement either. I sold only the well, your majesty, said Gapu, not the water. So whenever Danu draws water from the well, he has to pay me half a silver. Suku's jaw dropped open. Who ever heard of selling a well and charging for the water? Vera looked at Suku and raised his eyebrows. What do you say to that, Danu? Asked Prince Vera. Why would I buy just the well, your majesty? Asked Danu. I need water for my garden during the summer months, but he wouldn't let me draw water from my own well unless I paid him half a silver. But you signed the document, said Gapu, waving the scroll in front of Danu. It clearly says, just my well. Suku reached for the scroll. What Gapu said was true. This was a tricky problem. Vera wanted to talk it over with Suku. They went to the garden for a walk. Why would someone buy a well and not the water? Asked Vera. If the well was empty, he could store his pots and pans in it, suggested Suku. Or maybe he has relatives coming and they need room to stay, said Vera. Next time you come to stay, said Suku, I'll ask them to prepare the well. I'm sure you would join me too, said Vera, and maybe the well could be used as a hiding place. He was thinking about the hiding place his grandfather had made many years ago to escape from his enemies. The only trouble is, said Suku, this well is not empty. That's when Vera had an idea. Come on, let's go, he said. I know what to do. I've reached a decision, Prince Vera said, taking his seat in the courtyard. Everyone was quiet. They wanted to know how the prince would solve this tricky case. According to the document, Danu bought only the well, said Prince Vera, and not the water. Indeed, he should pay half a silver every time he draws water. Gapu was overjoyed. The prince is very astute, he thought. But Prince Vera continued. He may have bought the well so that he could use it to store his belongings, or perhaps he wanted to live in the well. Everyone was confused. As soon as the well was sold, explained Prince Vera, Gapu should have removed the water. But your majesty, said Gapu. Shh, warned Suku. Prince Vera wasn't finished. Gapu should take the water out of the well immediately, or he should pay rent for storing the water in Danu's well. Danu beamed. The prince is indeed wise and just, he thought. Gapu hung his head in shame. The prince had outwitted him with his own trick. Gapu agreed not to charge Danu for the water, lest he should be forced to pay for keeping the water in the well. The document was amended, and the prince warned Gapu not to try such a trick again. That was a little complicated, said Vera. It's water under the bridge now, Suku giggled. Seems like neighbors are not very nice to each other in our kingdom, observed Vera. That's why I live far away from the palace, said Suku. You might not be a good neighbor. Prince Vera chuckled. But soon he stopped because the next man who came in was crying. Please, said Prince Vera, tell me your grievance. My name is Kasi, your majesty, said the man, and I live next door to a man named Pawan. Are you crying because your name is Kasi or because you live next door to Pawan? Asked Suku. Neither, said Kasi. I am crying because Pawan stole all my precious belongings. It seemed that neighborly feuds were not over for the day. We'll be the judge of that, said Suku. Please state your case. My mother passed away a year ago, said Kasi. I had to go to the holy city of Varanasi to perform her death ceremony. Varanasi was a long way away. It took months to get there, even on horseback. Was the ceremony completed to your satisfaction? Asked Suku. Yes, it was, replied Kasi, but before I left Varanasi, I handed a jar of pickles over to my neighbor Pawan for safekeeping. It is important to keep pickles safe, said Prince Vera. He loved the tender mango pickles that Suku's mother made for him. He hid the jars in the royal kitchen so that he could eat pickles all year. Actually, the jar didn't have any pickles in it, said Kasi. I filled it with all my precious belongings, my gold ring, gold chain, silver coins, and even some rubies that had belonged to my mother. That's very clever, said Suku. So what is the problem? I didn't tell my neighbor that it was filled with valuables. He thought it was filled with pickles. Then what happened? Asked Vera, thinking of pickles had made his mouth water. When I came back yesterday and asked for the jar, said Kasi, Pawan returned my jar filled with pickles. My gold and silver and rubies were gone. Lemon or mango? Asked Vera. Suku nudged Vera. Was that even important? It was filled with tender mango pickles, said Kasi. He started to cry again. Every story had two sides. Prince Vera and Suku wanted to hear what Pawan had to say. Pawan was summoned to the court, but when he came before the prince, he didn't look worried. At your service, your majesty, he said. Your neighbor Kasi has lodged a complaint, said Suku. He claims that you stole his gold and silver and rubies, added Prince Vera. That's totally untrue, said Pawan. I didn't steal his gold, silver, or rubies. Can you prove that? Asked Vera. Kasi gave me the jar for safekeeping before he left on his travels, said Pawan. He repeatedly said that the jar contained tender mango pickles made by his mom before she died. He wanted me to keep it safe until he returned. Vera and Suku turned to look at Kasi, who was still crying. When Kasi came back yesterday, I returned his jar of pickles, Pawan continued. You can ask him what was in the jar. The jar was filled with tender mango pickles, your majesty, said Kasi. He gave me pickles, and he got back pickles, said Pawan. I never stole any gold or silver or rubies. Prince Vera was confused. Yet another case that looked straightforward but wasn't. Was Kasi lying about the precious stones and silver and gold inside the jar? Or had Pawan stolen everything and filled the jar with pickles? It was almost lunchtime and Vera was hungry. All of this talk of pickles was making him even hungrier. Let's finish this later, said Vera. I need to think about it a little longer. While the prince and his friend went to the royal dining hall, all the people waiting to see Vera were served lunch in the courtyard. As they walked, Vera said, I don't know who is lying. Maybe instead of eating here, we should go to my house for lunch, Suku suggested. My mother knows everything about pickles. That's the best idea you have had all day, said Prince Vera. He loved eating at Suku's house. Suku's mother was a wonderful cook. That day she served them freshly made bread with spinach, potatoes, and lentils, and some fresh fish, too. How about some tender mango pickles to go with that fish, she asked. Absolutely, chimed the boys in unison. Vera bit into the fresh fish and took a bite out of the tender pickled mango. Suku took a mouthful of rice mixed with the lentils, potatoes, and fish. Eat slowly, warned Suku's mother. It's so good we can't wait between mouthfuls, said Vera. Tell me about your latest case, said Suku's mother, so they did. Afterward, she said, I don't know anything about justice, dear Vera, but I know something about pickles. Suku's mother presented them with 2 cups of tender mango pickles. This one on the right, she said, was made this time last year. Suku and Vera touched the mango pieces. They were shrunken and wrinkly. Suku bit into a piece. It was very chewy and salty. This one on the left, she said, the one you had for lunch today, was made last week. The mangoes were fresh from the trees and soaked 2 days after being picked. These pieces were bright green without wrinkles. Vera bit into one. Crunch! The pickle was crunchy and the salt had not yet soaked into it. Vera and Suku made their way back in silence. They were both busy thinking. The court was ready for them when they reached the palace. Before they entered, Suku said, Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Maybe, said Vera. Are you thinking about crunchy pickles? Maybe. As soon as Vera settled into his seat, he said to Pawan, I want to sample those pickles in the jar. The guard placed the jar in front of the boys. The mango pieces were sloshing in the salt and chilly water. Suku took out 2 pieces of mango with a ladle. The boys picked up one tender mango each and turned it around like they were looking at diamonds.